Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is episode 20 for Monday, May the 12th, 2014. My name is Graham Perro. With me, as always, is Melissa Daphne, and hopefully Tyler Fitch will be joining us at some point soon. He is not available right now, but hopefully he'll be around later. We have the Q&A app running on Google+. If you head over to facebook.com/laxpodcast, that's probably the easiest way to find the page. I tweeted it earlier. If you look up Lax Podcast on Twitter, then the link will be there as well. So feel free to ask us any questions during the show, and we will get to them at some point, probably near the end of the show. And yeah, we'll answer any questions or address any comments that you may have. A couple of games this week. Obviously, only the two. We are now into the division finals. Rochester played in Buffalo, and Edmonton played in Calgary. Buffalo and Calgary fresh off of wins in the first round. Rochester and Edmonton fresh off of byes in the first round, so they might have been a little rusty, so we will address those games right now, I guess. We don't have any news for the week. Obviously no trades or things like that. I guess one bit of news that happened today was Garrett Billings underwent successful ACL surgery. The Rock tweeted that late this afternoon. They're talking about between 9 and 12 months of rehab. So obviously for Rock fans, we're hoping closer to the 9-month end of things. But hopefully he comes back healthy is basically what we're hoping for. If it's in time for the NHL season, great. But we obviously don't want to rush him back, because rushing back from an injury is never a good thing for the long-term health of the player. So good luck to Garrett Billings in his recovery. So let's get to the games of the week. We'll start with the Rochester-Buffalo game, and I want to send a shout-out to Steve Bermel and Scott Loeffler from the Bandits. Steve has gotten me tickets a couple times this year, not through his connections at the Bandits, just as a season ticket holder. He's able to buy tickets at a discount. So he told me at one point, hey, if you ever need tickets, just let me know. So I've done that through him a couple times this year. And I tried again for this game, and for whatever reason, I'm not sure, something happened, but he wasn't able to do it. But he did call Scott Loeffler, who I believe is the director of operations for the Bandits, and he managed to get me some tickets. So thanks a lot to those guys. That was great, and my son and I really enjoyed the game. To the game itself, in case you are watching the show but didn't pay attention to who won the game, which seems unlikely, but just in case, Buffalo did win that game 12-8. But I have to say, neither team was really in control at any point. The Rochester Nighthawks had a couple of leads here and there. Buffalo led for a little over half the game, I think. They kind of ran away with it in the fourth quarter, scoring about 5, and Rochester, I think, scored only 1 in the fourth. But certainly neither team was really in control. And you can't say you're in control when the biggest lead of the game is 4. But it was certainly obvious that each team knew the other team could just explode at any point. The Bandits certainly looked a lot more confident than they had in previous weeks, thanks partially to the fact that they were beating the Nighthawks, and thanks partially to their win last week, where they played really well. So, yeah, it wasn't a great game goaltender-wise. It wasn't a high-scoring game, and Cosmo played, I thought, pretty well, not outstanding. Matt Vince played pretty good, but again, not outstanding. The defenses were more the story than the goaltending. There weren't an awful lot of shots. I thought both defenses played really well. Buffalo particularly. The Rochester offense just kind of couldn't get things going. Now and again, obviously, I mean, you're not going to stop Dan Dawson and Cody Jamieson and these kind of guys for the whole game. And at one point, Stephen Keogh just took a rocket of a shot. It was just unbelievable. And I don't think Cosmo even moved, and I think that was because by the time his brain processed the fact that, hey, there's a ball coming at me, it was already behind him. So that was just a rocket of a shot, so that was impressive. couple more things, and I'll turn it over to you, Melissa. There's only about 9,200 fans in Buffalo, which was a couple thousand more than the Rock game the previous week. But again, they only had a week to advertise it, and that seems to be what happens in a lot of cases in the NLL. The less time you have before the game, the lower the attendance. But holy cow, was it loud! That's also typical for Buffalo. There may not be as many fans in this case, but other than the loudest games I've ever been to in Toronto, these 9,200 fans in Buffalo were louder than just about any game that you'll see at the ACC. Toronto fans are not known for being loud, but Buffalo fans were pretty impressive. And one more thing was, there hasn't been any announcement that this is John Tavares' last season, and it may or may not be. He is hinted anyway at the fact that he's thinking about retiring, but no announcement has been made. But the announcer for the Bandits certainly went on the assumption that it's possible that this was his last game in Buffalo. And so he announced it a couple of times after probably each of his goals, and then at the end of the game as well, announced him as the best NLL player ever, and I can't really argue with that. So it was certainly nice to see. I think on almost every one of his goals, he got a standing ovation from the crowd. So they sort of understood what was going on as well. So we'll see if they make it to the finals, then there will be another JT game in Buffalo, and if he doesn't retire, then there will be another season. Anyway, enough from me. Melissa, did you see this game?
I did. This was an interesting game. I felt like both teams in the first quarter kind of played sloppy, but Buffalo just started being more dominant in the second on. I felt like Rochester kind of underestimated them. I don't know if maybe they came in and they were just a little rusty from not playing last week or what, but it seemed like they were always a step behind Buffalo to me. But it was like you were saying, it didn't seem like either team was playing just really well. When you watch the two games, it almost seems like the game in the West was actually, that's the championship game, whereas this game was just, there just wasn't the same intensity, the same fight in it as in the other game. So it was very interesting, but the fourth quarter, it seemed like the Bandits were just kind of scoring at will. Like, if they had wanted to, they really could have just racked it up. I mean, they scored 5 goals in about 3 minutes. So they definitely took the lead, and Rochester just wasn't anywhere near it towards the end. It's going to be sad if it is Tavares' last Buffalo game. I think we're all kind of leaning towards that. Wonder if he is, since nothing's been announced. But yeah, just of the two games, I found this one a little unfulfilling. It just wasn't as good of a game, I guess. Maybe it was because I watched the Edmonton-Calgary game first, and so my expectations were up here and it was down here. I don't know. It was interesting. I didn't feel like Rochester really had that kick in the butt that they needed. And maybe it's because they know that they have the next game and that this isn't a must-win, and so they were kind of like, whatever. We'll get them next game, which I think is a very dangerous mindset to have. But I could also see them doing it, just being like, we're not going to push ourselves, we're not going to get hurt, because the next game is more important because of the overtime potential, the third game thing. So it was interesting. So.
All right. We'll move on to the Edmonton-Calgary game, and since I was at the Buffalo-Rochester game, I didn't get to see this one. I was hoping to find some time earlier today to watch at least part of it, but I never managed to do that. So I do have a few comments based on bits of the replays that I've seen and some of the sort of chatter going around Twitter and such. But I'll let you get started, seeing as you saw the actual game, so you'll have a little more insight on that.
Yeah, this one, it was an exciting game. It was just like pretty much all the games between these two teams have been this season. It's hard fought. It comes down to the wire. There's lots of good plays, a lot of hard plays. Just very intense game, and especially when it's coming down to the end and it's like scores still only 1 or 2 goals apart. Any game, anybody can actually take it at that point. So it's very intense, but it was interesting. I felt like Edmonton, they started off really strong, and then they kind of got sloppy in the second, and that's when Calgary kind of started finding their rhythm, so they were able to get back into the game. I think if Edmonton would have kept on playing the way they did in the first, it might have been a different game because they came out so hard. The announcer kept talking about how Jeff Snyder was missed and his impact on the floor, really can't be quantified because it's not on the scoreboard, things like that. But that he was missed, but he never said why he was out. So I'm suspecting that whatever it was that happened between him and his brother last week in Colorado or against Colorado had something to do with that. I don't know. I haven't seen anything. Maybe you have, Graham. But
No, I haven't heard a word actually.
yeah, so they kept saying about him being out, but never saying why. Um, third quarter, there was an interesting play. Edmonton shot the ball and Poulin blocked it, and it deflected, and it looked to me like it kind of hit the pipe and then angled, but it hit the ref right in the head, and he just went to the ground. And maybe he just remembered that later in the game against Edmonton. Joking, but it was definitely one of those things that it was like, whoa, you just don't see that too often. I know I've been amazed over the years because I have seen a few goalies take, or a few refs take shots to the head and stuff, that more of them don't wear helmets. I think I've only seen one actually wear a helmet of some kind. So it was definitely one of those reminders like, wow, even when you think you're safe, you're not safe. It's definitely going to come down to, this is another questionable game between these two. And what's really frustrating is it didn't have to be. Late in the fourth, like there was 40 seconds left, something like that. Edmonton got called on a too many men penalty. I don't know that if it was or if it wasn't too many men. Unfortunately, the shot was very close, so you couldn't see. But even though they were on offense, that resulted in Calgary getting a penalty shot. I thought that only happened on when it was defense, which could have impacted the play that they got the penalty shot, but apparently it goes both ways. So Curtis Dixon scores. It goes in, but from the angle they show, it looks like a clear crease violation. The goal, for whatever reason, is not reviewed, which I thought all goals under 2 minutes were still being reviewed. But then that sends it into overtime. And then in overtime, Calgary wins it. So you have another questionable call late in the game that allows for a tie game, and then the other team wins in overtime. So there's going to be controversy on this, and if Calgary does win the next one, then there's probably it's going to shut it down. But if next game is anything like the last two have been, it's still going to be a controversial win or loss for either team. It's just, it does seem like Edmonton has kind of gotten screwed on their last two games by the refs, and you hate seeing that and you hate saying that, but when you see the video, it's like, okay, this was a bad call or something happened, and you see a direct impact in the score that ended up changing the outcome of the game. So it's going to be interesting. So did you have anything to add, Graham?
Yeah, I agree that it seems odd that Edmonton's only lost 3 games total this season out of the, 20 they've played, or 19 they've played now. And 2 of them, and both against Calgary, came down to a bad ref call in the last minute of the game. The previous one was just a couple weeks ago when Jeff Snyder was not called for over and back. And that, I mean, that was so blatant and clear that it's not even funny. And so there's no question that the refs got that one wrong. This one, there's more of a question. I've seen some pictures that the NLL has posted showing the ball in the net, and Curtis Dixon's foot looks like it hasn't quite hit the ground yet. But I still think it's that still picture is not 100% clear. There's another one that somebody else posted with Dixon's foot clearly on the line, but you couldn't see the ball. So unless there's a really good video of it, preferably from up top, I think that would probably be a better view. Um, Still pictures aren't really giving you the whole picture. So I can't say whether it was the right call or not. And I'm with you. I couldn't see the too many men because the camera angles were such that you couldn't see the whole floor. So it was hard to tell whether that was the right call. But either way, the goal should have been reviewed because it was close enough. The reason they don't, they did have a rule at one point saying every goal in the final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter and in overtime must be reviewed. And then they changed that because I'm pretty sure it was last season. It might have been 2 years ago, but I'm pretty sure it was last year. A game in either Edmonton or Calgary. I don't remember which one it was. I'm thinking Edmonton, where there were about 4 goals scored in the last minute. And I think at this point it was like a 7-goal game. So even the last 4 goals were not going to make a difference to the outcome of the game. But they reviewed each and every one of those, and each and every one of the reviews took like 2 minutes. So the last 5 minutes of the game took a half an hour to play because of these reviews. And one of the goals was an empty net goal that the guy had scored from about 30 yards out. There was no chance at all that there was a crease violation or that he didn't beat the whistle or he didn't beat the shot clock or anything. There was just no reason for this goal to be reviewed. But the rule said it has to be, so it was. And that was why that took any more than 5 seconds to review. But anyway, there was a lot of outcry about that because it just killed the flow of that game. And within a couple of days, the NLL announced, okay, from now on, we don't have to review every single goal. It's up to the ref's discretion to decide whether or not it needs to be reviewed. But in this case, it should have been, especially in a playoff game where the score is now tied with 20 seconds left. There was no reason not to review that goal. Even if they made the right call, it still should have been reviewed. So there was that, and I wanted to say one other thing, and I can't find it.
Well, while you're looking for that, I was actually surprised they reviewed the ones in overtime and they didn't review that one. I just thought that was really strange. But if the coaches are still restricted on not being able to throw the flag within those 2 minutes, then I think they really need to reevaluate this because that doesn't give them a challenge. And if the ref is saying, no, I don't want to review it, then there's something wrong there. I think we're all in agreement that whether or not it was the right call or wrong call, that goal should have been reviewed, just plain and simple.
Yeah, and I think the only reason that they don't allow the coaches review in the last 2 minutes is because the coaches always would. They would request a review for a team that's losing anyway. They're going to request a review and basically give themselves an extra timeout to go over plays or give their players a rest or whatever they want to do. If they want to kill the flow of the game, that's the way to do it. I'm not sure that's a really big deal, considering they only get one challenge anyway, so at most they can do this once. And if they've done it at any point in the previous 28 minutes of that half, they can't do it anyway. So I'm not sure if disallowing a coach's challenge in the last 2 minutes really makes a lot of sense anyway. But I'm with you. If they're not going to let the coaches do the challenge, they better review anything that's remotely close. Obviously, these empty net goals where there's no question, or if the guy shoots and beats the goalie and there's 5 seconds left on the shot clock and he's not anywhere near the crease, then maybe there's no need to review those ones either. But if it's close like this, then yeah, that should have been reviewed for sure. And it's disappointing that Edmonton gets, as you say, they get kind of screwed from this one. They definitely got screwed on the previous one, and both of them led to Edmonton losses, and that's 2 of the 3 losses in their entire season. Yeah, so I guess that's it for the games. Couple more topics to discuss. First one is Dylan Ward got his stuff back. And I know a little bit about this. I don't know if you know more, so you want to talk about that one.
Well, this was definitely, when it was announced that he got his gear back, there was definitely a lot of grumblings. Oh, isn't that interesting? He gets his gear back after he plays Calgary. And, if he actually was living in Canada, which is what I think most people assumed, then that would probably be a little more suspect. But he actually lives in Denver. So apparently, what happened is some Colorado native who knew what it was came across some homeless guys that were trying to sell it, saying they found it in a trash can. He saw what it was and bought it off him for like $40, and Ford got his gear back. So, in Denver, I guess even smelly equipment you just don't want to leave out on your porch because anything that can be sold will be taken and will be attempted to be sold. But the good thing is he got his gear back, and I know from all the lacrosse players I've ever talked to, when you get your gear the way you like it, they don't even like to get new gear. So it's probably a relief, and I think as the last game showed, even though he could play well in different gear, it did have an impact on his game.
So getting it back is certainly good news for Ward. A little late for the Mammoth in general, but good news for him. The other thing I wanted to mention was the new playoff format, and we've talked about this before about how we weren't sure whether this whole 2-game set with a mini game following, we weren't sure how that was going to work or whether that was going to be a good thing or a bad thing. And we still haven't seen. We're still in the middle of the first round that it actually applies to. But it's had a bit of an interesting effect in that it seems to have reversed the importance of the games in my mind. It looked like I would have thought game 1 was important, game 2 was the critical one, and then if necessary, obviously there's a game 3 as well, which is going to be the deal breaker. But it almost looks like game now, and but the same thing applies to the Roughnecks. They've won game 1. Obviously, if they win game 2, it's over. But even if they lose game 2, they still have this mini game. So basically, the Nighthawks have to win 70 minutes worth of lacrosse. The Bandits only have to win 10. So that gives them a huge, and more so than if it was a 3-game series, I think, because if it was a 3-game series, obviously they want to win game 2, and then it'll be over. But if they don't win game 2, then they have to win another full game. This way, if they're 2/3 of the way, and the other full game would probably be at least the next day, if not the next week. In this case, if they're down by 5 in the fourth quarter, they might just say, you know what, let's concede this game. Let's pull JT off the floor. Let's pull Stainhouse off the floor. Let's pull Cosmo out. Put the backup goalie in. Guys, going to happen in 20 or whenever after this game ends. And then we'll send out Steve Priolo, and we'll send out Billy D. Smith and Rory Smith and the big grinders and the tough guys, and say, okay, well, don't start fights and don't take stupid penalties. And I mean, we don't want to lose this game. Well, we're going to lose this game anyway, I suppose. But if we lose those players, they're on for them. Don't really have the option of pulling Dan Dawson and pulling Cody Jamieson and sitting them aside and saying, okay, you guys will just rest up for the mini game that starts in a while, unless they're up by 12 or something. They still need to win that game. And if they start pulling off their top offensive guys, first of all, they run the risk that Buffalo will come back and they'll lose that game and it'll be over. Also, in the case of Rochester, they don't get an awful lot of transition goals. I've looked at a number of their recent games, and all of their goals are scored by Jamieson and Keogh and Dawson and Paulus. But other than their main offensive guys, they're not getting a lot of transition goals. So if you pull off the main offensive guys to let them rest for the next game, you're going to get nothing. So there's a ton of pressure on the Nighthawks now. Like I said, they have to win game 2 and they have to win the overtime, the mini game. Whereas the Bandits have a little less pressure. They can kind of rest up in the second half of game 2 if they need to, knowing that the mini game is going to follow right afterwards. So I think Game 1 is turned out to be a much bigger game than Game 2 is going to turn out to be. What do you think?
I think it's interesting that you say that because when we were discussing it, it did seem like, okay, whatever team has the momentum going into the second game is probably going to keep that going into that overtime, or since it's not an overtime period, it's a 10-minute set mini game, which I think we have to keep remembering because I think most people are like, oh, well, it's just going to be like an overtime. No, it's not because you just got to play that. But we've seen so many scoreless quarters this season that actually could have a very different impact. So, do you have the team that has the momentum going into it, or do you have the team, like you said, that might be, yeah, you know what, this game we may not take it. Let's just prepare for that third game. It's going to be interesting to see how the coaches really do go into this game and the players because it's a very different mindset if you're really not taking that second game seriously if you're Buffalo or Calgary versus if you're Rochester and Edmonton, where it's like, wow, this is a must win. It's going to be very interesting. I think. I'm not sure that I'm liking this. You know, there is something to be said about the one and done. You put it all out there, and either you win or you don't. Sometimes you have an off night. Sometimes you have a great night. But that's all there is to it. This whole splitting up of the games and a week later, and I'm just not thinking I'm liking it so far. So it'll be interesting to see how this finishes out and how the games look next week and what they decide. But my initial impression, I'm not liking it.
All right, and one other thing that I noticed being at the Buffalo game, right after the game, the Buffalo players all got together and were doing the hugs and the high fives and such. And it looked like they were, and the Nighthawks sort of got together, and then as a group walked right to the dressing room, walked right off the floor. And of course, this being the NLL, there's always handshakes after the game, after every game. Um, and I mean, you can count probably on one hand the number of games where the handshakes have been canceled by the refs because tensions are high or whatever. In the games, the handshakes happen. In this case, the Nighthawks walked off the floor, and then the Bandits hung around because they were doing their little victory lap and all that. But the Nighthawks got booed. I thought they were being. I mean, you can't blame them. I thought that was awfully weird. My only thought was, I wonder if this is because it's a series. Because you see that in baseball, you see that in hockey. They play a best of 7 series, and at the end of it, but that I don't know what I was doing here. Um, and I did eventually see a tweet from I think it was Bud Bailey, the Bandits writer for one of the Bandit or Buffalo newspapers, saying that that's exactly what happened. And then I saw some tweets from I saw the thing from Bud Bailey today actually, rather than on Saturday. But I did see from Calgary fans saying the same thing. The Rush just walked off the floor without the handshakes. How that's not classy and all that kind of thing. So if they're going to do something like that, you're gonna want to not advertise, but announce that and just say the handshakes are not going to happen until the end of the series rather than the end of each game. I'm not sure I agree with the decision, first of all, but if you're going to do something like that and change that fundamental part of the game, you need to tell people so that they're not getting all angry at the teams just walking off the floor.
Yeah, that seems like a very weird change to make just for the postseason. I don't understand the rationale behind it. And as we were discussing, when I think preseason when we are discussing whether or not maybe that should be done away with, that's a part of the game. That just seems weird to change it. Hopefully they'll change it back and not do that again. It's silly.
Yep, agreed. Okay, so I guess we are down to our predictions for next week. Um, and I guess I'll go first with mine. I made predictions for who's going to win the series as opposed to who's going to win game two, because then they have game 2.5 or whatever you want to call it, the mini game. Um, so for the East final, I am going to go with the Rochester Nighthawks. Um, so I guess I'm basically picking Rochester to win game two and the mini game because that's the only way it can happen. Um, they didn't. I didn't think they looked overly prepared. Like you said, they might have kind of taken the Bandits a little bit for granted, or been a little overconfident, or maybe the bye week affected them more than they expected it to, or something. But they just didn't as strong a game as they have for most of the season. And I think they'll be a little bit more prepared this time, and uh, I think they're really interested in this three-peat thing. So I don't think they're going to let Buffalo get by them again. Um, so I'm going to go with Rochester on in the East, and in the West, same thing, I guess. I'm going to go with Edmonton. Um, as long as they can have a big enough lead by the fourth quarter that if some weird refereeing thing happens, they're still ahead by enough that it won't make as much of a difference. Um, but I think Edmonton's just too strong to lose two in a row. Um, and this has no bearing on the actual what's actually going to happen, but I think it would be kind of a shame if Edmonton had the season that they had, almost perfect through. I mean, they were perfect through three-quarters of the season. 16-2 is pretty much an unbelievable record, and to have the season that they had, if they don't win the championship, it'll be kind of a shame. Um, so maybe that's influencing my decision to go with Edmonton. But anyway, I'm going to go with Rochester and Edmonton to meet in the final. Unfortunately, we don't have picks for Tyler because he never managed to get his in before we started recording. So if he doesn't join us in the next few minutes before we close, then we will have no picks for him. But Melissa, you've got a few. What do you think?
Man, this was tough. The way these teams have been playing, and as hard fought as this has been, I waffled back and forth between these guys. This was really tough. I think Rochester's going to win the second game, but I can see them just, if they play like they have the past couple games, is kind of what I'm basing it on. I think Bandits are going to take it because of that mini game. I think when Buffalo needs to, they can really turn it on, and we've seen them do it previously this season. So I think Rochester's going to take the next game. Bandits are going to take it overall, but I think it's going to be an interesting game, especially since it's going to depend on which Buffalo team shows up. Part of me wanted to pick Buffalo last week, and I didn't, and obviously I should have. The Calgary and Edmonton game, another tough one. So many of these games between them have been one goal in overtime, and especially since the last two have been kind of fluky. But Edmonton is just, they're not going to give up easily. I think that with the back-to-back games, their youth actually might benefit them just a little bit. And they have that momentum going that they build up in the fourth quarter a lot. And so I think that might just carry them over. So I'm going to take Edmonton to take both those games. But I will definitely admit, these were hard decisions. I could have gone completely either direction.
Agreed. I switched back and forth a number of times before settling on what I think, or probably what I think is going to happen. One thing I didn't mention was our picks from last week. I went 1-1, as did Tyler, and Melissa unfortunately went 0-2. Though I think if you had told me before the game, or before the game started, that I would go 1-1, I would have said, yeah, I got the Edmonton one was wrong. Confident on that, but turns out it was the other way around. I got the Buffalo game right and the Edmonton one wrong. So overall, I'm 2-2. Tyler and Melissa are both 1-3. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to mark those down next week. If there's a mini game, does that count as a game, or does it just count as a kind of a weird overtime for game 2? So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, I guess this week our website is addictedtolacrosse.com, and you can check out all of our previous recordings there. You can also find us at feedback@addictedtolacrosse.com, so feel free to send us an email and any comments that you may have. We're now on Facebook, as I mentioned before, facebook.com/laxpodcast. So give us a like over there, and that's where we'll be posting links to the shows beforehand and links to the shows once they're archived. You can also send us questions during the week at our Twitter account, which is Lax Podcast as well. And we will get to them during the next show. That's it. So this has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For the MIA Tyler and Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.